Thank you, Peter. Sorry, I still have to recoup myself from this enormous, gigantic introduction. But anyway, thank you. I'm glad I can present some of the work we did in the European project. And this piece of work is specifically about the build-up of recharging infrastructure in 7 NSR countries, which will be shown later in a picture. What I would like to do today is to take you briefly through the 7 stories of the 7 countries in the NSR region and try to contrast this in the end among these countries, but also specifically with the situation in the Netherlands, as Julia just explained it. So if I can have my first slide up. Yes, so the content of the talk today is 7 countries, 7 stories, and I will try to, again, briefly, from a bird's eye perspective, show you who is doing what in the different countries and why they do so, and what this results in. And in the end, I will present a cross-country analysis on 4 subjects. The first is the question whether countries develop a nationwide network or whether they settle for now for regional, smaller networks with their own designs, and lack of interoperability to go with that. The second option is the task division between the different stakeholders in these countries. The third question is whether these countries aim for regular charging, so relatively low-speed charging, or whether they go for semi-fast and fast charging. And finally, I will try to discuss the role of the EVs as they are kind of in the discourse in these countries, how the EVs are presented as to be part of future energy systems. Now this impacts the build-up of the infrastructure. Sorry. First country, I will take a counterclockwise round through the region, and I don't have any pictures on my slides, but I do have flags. So if you have fun with flags, you're fine. But I don't have any pictures because I didn't want to have charging stations on every slide. First of all, United Kingdom. The situation there is dominated by these 8 plugged-in places, as they call them. So they have a strongly regional approach to the build-up of the recharging infrastructure. And these plugged-in places are effectively public-private partnerships in which local governments, supported by national government, interact with regional energy suppliers and especially the local hosts. So a lot of the infrastructure that is being created in these plugged-in places is situated in private and semi-public locations. So truly public charging is quite rare in England, as I can judge it. Outside these plugged-in places, not so much is happening. There are 2, I think, quite interesting initiatives on a truly commercial basis. First is the Polar Network. This is a network specifically aimed to connect the plugged-in places in the different regions to form corridors between these regions. And this network is set up by an equipment manufacturer. And I think this is unique in the European situation, where the equipment manufacturers are actively setting up a recharging network and operating this themselves as well. Another, I think, quite interesting initiative is the Ecotricity Network. This is a renewable energy supplier which is setting up its own charging stations together with a Welcome Break, which is a highway restaurant chain in England. So these are 2, I think, quite interesting, truly commercial initiatives that try to augment what national government is doing in its regional approach. Second, Belgium. This is one of the dark horses, if I may be so free to comment, in Europe, where they do not do so much, and most of what they do is concentrated in the 5 living labs that were set up in Belgium. 2 of the prominent projects are the EVA project, in which they really focus on cars, so not so much on infrastructure, but mostly on cars, and to some extent on the interaction between cars and the grid. So there is some attention for charging equipment, but not so much. Another one is the Olympus project, in which they focus on charging at railway stations. So again, this is not super on-street anywhere charging, but is specifically targeted at specific groups. Beyond these living labs, quite interesting that in a country like Belgium, the company of Total is setting up fast chargers along highways at its gas stations. Which is, I think, funny because in the ladder of Lade, as they call it in the Netherlands, fast charging comes at the far end, and this country, Belgium, is quite active with fast chargers. So this is kind of an unbalance, you could say, between regular charging and fast charging. And in the semi-public sphere, some is done by the Dutch company, the New Motion, but also the Belgium sort of equal company, Blue Corner. The Netherlands, I think quite a lot has been said already, but maybe to pick up on last discussion before me. I think the Netherlands is quite specific in its challenge to provide recharging infrastructure for people close to their homes for night charging. Most of the other countries, when they talk about public charging, it's about this opportunity charging. So whenever you go to a city, you visit it, and you want to charge there, this is what they try to provide with their public recharging infrastructure. But the situation in the Netherlands where we need to provide EV drivers with a parking spot close to their homes, it's quite unique in the European context, I think. So I think that's a reason to appreciate the problem and to appreciate the fact that it's difficult and that we have a hard time to find a solution there. And finally, this initiative of Rijkswaterstaat, so the Dutch national road authorities, it's quite unique as well to provide an opportunity to businesses to install fast chargers along the highways without any subsidies. This is unique in Europe, and it's also quite remarkable that actually commercial businesses are very much interested in, and they will invest in these fast chargers without public subsidies. This is unique in Europe. Germany, very similar to the UK, again concentrated in a limited number of model regions, as they call it in Germany, and followed by 4 showcase regions. Again, these are public-private partnerships with strong involvement of local hosts, so people are wanting to charge on close to shops or at offices, supported by national and regional governments, with the involvement of the big German energy suppliers. But as a result, this has resulted in regional networks, but also in networks of different energy suppliers which are not compatible with each other. So roaming between these networks and between the regions is quite problematic still in Germany. And this, I think, when we look at the corridor for driving along the highway, the North Sea, the German case is kind of a challenging one to fill this gap still. Also, fast chargers are really rare in Germany. And this, of course, I think has to do with German car industry only now coming to the market with their electric vehicles. So there was not too much ambition in German national government to support electric vehicles and the build-up of recharging infrastructure. Denmark. I think Denmark is one of the examples to many countries, and this was mostly due, I think, to local governments in Denmark being very active in setting up recharging infrastructure that people could use for free generally. And now I think they're leading in a way, and this is a bit different from the Dutch case, but they're leading in by saying, well, we have enough chargers, regular chargers in public space, so let's not focus on that anymore. Let's focus on home charging for people who can charge at home, and let's focus on the build-up of a fast charging infrastructure for people that want to do their ad hoc charging during trips. And in these dynamics, there was a competition, a very interesting race between 2 companies, Clever, which is a subsidiary of several energy suppliers, and a Better Place, which is now, of course, bankrupt. But they were fighting to come to a nationwide network of either fast chargers or battery swapping stations. And this race is really what you want to have in a country when you want to see a national recharging infrastructure being built up. And now, to me, the question is, now Better Place is bankrupt, what will happen in the future? And will the company of Clever still see this need to expand its network? And well, maybe they can even profit from a Better Place being bankrupt now. Sweden, I think next to Belgium, and excuse me for the Swedish colleagues in the room, but it's a problem country. Except for when you look at the city of Stockholm, they do very interesting stuff. The national government is still waiting and thinking about what to do, while the rest of Europe is, of course, far ahead now. But the city of Stockholm, they have a lot of chargers in public space, but they've delegated this task to their parking company, and this parking company has installed chargers in indoor but also outdoor parking facilities, and charging costs are completely included in the parking tariffs. So they are able to install very cheap chargers without complicated metering systems and payment systems. So with low-cost charges, they can include these costs in the parking tariffs. And I know this has been discussed in the Netherlands as well, but we might want to look at Sweden for I think, a successful example. Another thing I want to remark about Sweden is there's this myth about Sweden having these millions of sockets out on the streets for engine preheaters, but so far they have not been used for charging as I understand it. So this myth, I mean, these sockets are out there, but they're not really suitable for EV charging, so let's not expect too much from those. Finally, coming to the far north of the NSR, Norway. It's one of the few countries where the national government actually provides subsidies for companies and individuals that want to install chargers on the street. And this has especially resulted in a dense network of fast chargers. And in the cities like Denmark, Norway has chosen to offer free charging on the street, again using very cheap chargers, so being able to set up a lot of charging stations. So wrapping up these 7 different countries, I think the most interesting aspect when you look at the 7 countries is the question whether these countries go for a nationwide network or whether they settle for these regional projects and regional networks that evolve from them. And countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, they have these national networks where people can drive throughout the country and charge anywhere they like, either with an interoperable charging card or simply because charging is free for all. And these countries are very ambitious and they focus on getting numbers of EVs on the road. While these other countries that I already showed you, like Germany and like the UK, they focus on these model regions or plugged-in places, and they have a much more innovation-minded focus. They claim, at least, saying that we're not aiming for a national standard, we're not aiming for mass already, we're aiming for diversity, we're aiming for innovation, and through that we're aiming to learn. And also, this is for them, I think it's a bad excuse for not doing too much, but they claim this is good for economic growth as well, because you give a lot of companies a lot of opportunities to experiment. Now, I prepared for you a question whether these countries are right, or whether countries like the Netherlands are actually right by trying to create a lot of mass already and trying to create not so much diversity, but to create opportunities for true learning and learning by numbers, not just learning by diversity. So if the technology doesn't fail us today, there should be a question up quite soon, giving you this question: what do you believe in? If you want to stimulate innovation, do you go for mass through standardization early on, or do you go for diversity and sort of laissez-faire approach in these developments? And I'm not sure if I have to go now through the next slide, but I'm glad with the answers. I do believe that we have to go for mass in the early markets, for true learning, like I said earlier. And I don't think experimenting in small settings, tinkering in workshops, of course you can learn a lot, but true learning is only done in practice, I think, and not by using 1 or 2 cars, but by using a lot of cars. So thank you for your answers. And maybe we can discuss this later on as well in the discussion. Yes. So this task division between different actors, it's a big theme in the Netherlands. So far, who's doing what, and who should own the charging stations, who should operate them, and who should have the contact with the customers in the end, so who will be the service provider. It's a very mixed picture in different countries. And I think it depends as well on well, one thing I might want to pick out to see the structure of the energy industry. In the Netherlands, we have a strong separation now between the energy suppliers, producers, on the one hand, and grid operators on the other hand. And there are some tensions between these formerly joined up companies. Now they're separated, and this seems to be, as I was told, their first fight after they had a breakup. And they're struggling over who will do what, and also who gets to profit from, well, potential commercial profits, but also from the knowledge that is gained in these projects, and who gets to control the grid in the end, or gets to control smart charging equipment, for instance. Other countries like Norway, where the electricity industry is still integrated, they don't have these struggles, and it's much easier to set up fast chargers, for instance. Yeah, the question of semi-fast versus fast charging. You see fast charging mainly in the Netherlands, semi-fast charging you see mainly in the Netherlands and Germany, where we already have a strong grid, but also where there's a strong focus on commercialization of charging infrastructure. So it's not like in the Nordic countries where charging is often free. And governments, local governments choose very cheap chargers, but in the Netherlands, with this early choice for commercialization, there's a bigger drive to go for semi-fast charging and also to use smart chargers that do billing and metering and stuff. So this commercialization goes very well hand in hand with the semi-fast charging. And fast charging, I think, is one-on-one coupled with the ambitions that a country shows. So ambitious countries like the Netherlands, like Denmark, like Norway, they're really pushing the fast charging infrastructure or supporting it. And there's also commercial opportunities, of course, when you have a lot of cars on the road. And slow charging is really rare in these other countries. Finally, the role of EVs in the future energy system. And this is difficult for an outsider to kind of judge, and I got some comments on my take on the German situation yesterday already. But in the Netherlands, at least in a rhetorical sense, there's a strong focus on the role of electric vehicles as energy buffers for intermittent renewable energy sources, but also the relation between electric vehicles and the grid. So electric vehicles may pose a threat to grid stability, but on the other hand, EVs may have a positive role as well in balancing local grids. And this is a big part, at least again in a rhetorical sense, in the Netherlands, but in other countries this is quite different. And for instance, in Denmark it's the same. So they have a lot of wind power, they need electric vehicles to store energy at night. But in countries like Norway and Sweden, I think this is good for us to remember, they have a lot of hydropower or nuclear power like in Sweden, so they don't have these balancing issues between day and night, for instance. And here this is totally not part of the debate, and this also makes that energy companies in those countries are not so much triggered to engage with electric mobility in setting up the charging infrastructure, unless these companies are still owned by public governments that want to do something about the climate or air quality, of course. But just this talk about the future of EVs in the energy system is only valid in a couple of countries. Also, this impact of EVs on the grid, it's very much part of the Dutch debate, and also in Belgium and in the UK, for instance, in London, where they have relatively old grid, can be soon a problem. So there's quite some reluctance to set up charging infrastructure, and especially fast chargers in London are a problem because of the poor grid. But in other countries, people don't seem to care so much yet about the impact of EVs on the grid, and it does not really reason to invest in smart charging, for instance. So with that, I come to my final slide to thank you and ask you whether you have any questions. And the talk I had today is based on a report that will be out soon. I hope within a month it will be available on the E-mobility NSR website. And otherwise, please send me a mail and I will try to send you the report as soon as it's finished. Thank you for your attention.
First round of applause. Thank you.